The Voltari military headquarters were in a state of constant agitation. Each office, each communication post, even each corridors were filled with activity, as the officers of each branch of the army were doing their best to prepare the upcoming war. The neighboring Ishtal Empire had been amassing ships at their border for a few days, and everyone's fear had been confirmed this morning. The empire demanded their vassalization within a week, or they would impose their will by force. The Voltari Republic was a democracy. Bowing down to a tyrant was out of question. They immediately sent an ask for help to all factions that could possibly take their side, and all the most important Voltari military leaders were waiting for the answers in the grand meeting hall of the Army HQ. Finally, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Diplomacy entered the room and started his speech. "I know you are all very short on time, so I will get straight to the point. Nobody will join this war on our side." The room exploded with disappointment, and some generals even stood up from their seats, ready to leave. The Voltari didn't have a strong military, nor the industry to mobilize and expend their fleet. They were a mostly agricultural country. Without outside help, they stood no chance. The minister kept on going. However, the amount of economic sanctions against the empire, as well as humanitarian help promised, was far higher than what we expected and— "Excuse me, Minister. Could you get to the point? What military help can we actually expect?" It was the head of defense who just spoke. He clearly did not care for anything but substantial help from species who could actually provide it. Well, the Kistars, Esti, humans, and Ophilages all promised significant military material donation, as well as trainers to help with mobilization. The generals seemed a little relieved. Those were all prime military and industrial powers. If they really acted on those promises, then the Republic might have a chance. The humans also offered to send an attaché. "A what?" asked the head of defense. "An attaché. If I understood correctly, it's a kind of strategic advisor who will observe our tactics and help us improve them." A field marshal cited. She thought that sounded more like an annoyance. "Why would we want human strategic insight anyway?" she asked. "Well, for starters, the humans never lost a war." "Are you joking?" screamed an admiral. "Against the Deru 45 years ago, they did not win a single battle." "Yes, but they did win the war." "How so?" "Well, I think I will explain. Who knows, maybe some of us will be inspired by the way humans win wars. 5 decades ago, the Deru were the biggest exporters of luxury products and consumer goods in a 30,000 light-years radius. However, the rising humans were starting to get into that market too, and the Deru revenues were starting to take a dip. To make matters worse, the Deru had been the unofficial protectors of a trade station network called the RCU for nearly a century. Around this time, the RCU signed an official protectorate treaty with the humans. Safe to say the Deru were furious. I think now is a good time to mention that the Deru and humans were nearly neighbors. Their territories were separated by a 300 light-years wide band of unclaimed space, called the Great Way. The absence of borders made it ideal for trade, but also piracy, which is why the RCU was installed there and why they needed protection. When the Deru declared war, they had a marvelous fleet, comprised of hundreds of heavy ships, like dreadnoughts and carriers. The humans, on the other hand, only had a handful of these, most of them being prototypes anyway. The bulk of their navy was still made of light ships, like corvettes, destroyers, or frigates. These kind of ships had no chance against the Deru navy, and they indeed lost every single actual battle of the war. But that didn't matter. The human strategy was, for lack of a better word, insane. They placed a blockade on the Deru, and enforced it with a fleet much weaker than their opponent. But for what? The Deru economy covered nearly everything, and would not collapse without imports like a lot of other would. But the humans only wanted to block their exports, to force the customers to switch to their products. Even in war, they did not seek to invade their enemies, capture territories, and win battles. No, war was merely another way to reach the same goal as peace. Now, you're probably wondering why the Deru didn't use their superior navy to break the blockade. Well, their territory was gigantic. There was nearly 7,000 different systems trading ships would use to go from Daru territory to the Great Way. The Daru simply did not have enough ships to put one in each system, so most of the time, they would warp to a system, push the humans out, and move on to the next one. As soon as a trading ship tried to go through the supposedly liberated systems, the humans would come back and destroy it. To be able to put ships on every single system, the human used everything they had, not hesitating to get decades-old designs out of their dust hangars to send them to the front line. They modified a mass-produced commercial cargo ship to turn it into a low-cost interceptor. It was the cheapest, ugliest piece of scrap the galaxy had ever seen, but it did not matter. What was important was that human dockyards could pump out 10 of those in a day without breaking a sweat. By the end of the war, they had at least 7 ships in every Daru border system. Then, every time an enemy ship entered their system, the humans would just flee, without fighting. If necessary, they would engage in combat, but only to buy time for others to escape. This is why they lost every battle. They weren't even trying to win. The Daru High Command quickly changed their strategy. Instead of trying to clear every system, they just keep their ship in a few of them, to get the way open. However, the humans would just ambush the traders in the next systems, as soon as they entered the Great Way. In the end, the Daru were forced to deploy their fleet in dozens of systems to keep a single trade route open. There was worse. The humans began to arm pirates and offer them amnesty after the war, under the condition that they attacked only Daru ships. This strategy strained the Daru resources even further and ensured the blockade stayed up. The worst part was that other route to leave Daru territory existed, but they had just more border taxes to pay. The only effect of the blockade was a 30% to 50% increase in price on Daru products, but that was all the humans needed to convince customers to switch to them. Now, the best part is, from the point of view of the Daru, the real war hadn't even started. The blockade was more of an annoyance, while they were preparing for a complete invasion of mankind. But as soon as their invasion fleet was about to cross the Great Way, the humans surrendered. That was very surprising to the Daru, but they gladly accepted this easy victory. Even at the negotiation table, the humans' cunning and deception continued to shine. They offered substantial war reparations if they could keep their protectorate over the RCU. The Daru diplomats, convinced that the humans valued the RCU greatly, decided to take it instead, without reparations. This was exactly what the humans wanted, of course. After the war, most people had switched to buying human products and did not switch back to the Daru. Defending the RCU network against pirates was costly, and only really worth it if you had a lot of goods flowing through them. The Daru were left weakened, cut from their main source of revenue, with a boulder tied to their legs. The humans had secured control over a gigantic market while earning the respect of most pirates in the Great Way. This, my friends, is how humans win wars. Not just through glorious battles and shining conquest, but through control of every single detail in everything field, with an overarching strategy encompassing everything. Most of the generals in the room were already discussing new strategies, inspired by the human doctrine. The head of defense stood up. Tell the humans to send their attaché, and let's hope they'll be as brilliant for us as they were against the Daru. The Voltari capital was still in the same state of incredible agitation as when the Ishtal ultimatum arrived 3 days ago. Everyone was bracing for the worst, as it felt each second passing was only making the disaster closer. But rather than silently accepting their fate, the Voltari people were preparing with frenetic activity. Everyone, from the greatest generals to the most humble commoners, tried to do their best to help with the coming menace. The panicked state of the city contrasted greatly with the silence of the Presidential Strategic Office, where most of the government and military commanders were gathered. The atmosphere was tense, as the leaders of the Republic were waiting for a guest that would hopefully help them sort out the situation. Finally, the human envoy entered the room. She was relatively small and unimpressive for someone of her importance, and the black uniform of the Special Forces didn't really suit her well. She introduced herself as Commander Mora, and claimed to be nothing more than a messenger for human high command. Some Voltari generals looked like they already regretted wasting their precious time on this top-secret meeting. Regardless, Commander Mora started her briefing. I will start with the immediate defense strategy we conceived, since it needs to be addressed as soon as possible. A map of the Voltari Republic appeared on the giant screen behind her. It was labeled with the priority of defending various systems, as well as the defensive line that the Navy should try to establish. Most generals looked disappointed, as they felt no new ideas were brought to the table. The members of the government, on the other hand, were horrified. The only exception was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was trying to hold back laughter about the reaction of his colleagues. After a few seconds of heavy silence, the Minister of Defense finally spoke. You expect us to give up half of our territory without a fight? The head of defense sighed. He had always disliked his civilian counterpart, as he felt the position was very redundant with his own. The person occupying it currently didn't help to improve his opinion of it. Allow me to explain, Mr., he said, putting emphasis on the fact that his interlocutor was not a member of the military. I believe I understand the human strategy. In fact, it is very similar to the one I was about to suggest this afternoon. He turned to Commander Mora. Do you want to explain it yourself or? Go on, I'll complete your speech about anything you've missed. The head of defense cleared his throat and started. We are first and foremost an agricultural country. Most of our economic power and population is concentrated on our 45 habitable worlds. Systems that don't contain one might as well be empty. In fact, they pretty much are. They have no value, aside from their potential strategic position. Now, if you look at the map, you'll see that the territory that we would give up are entirely made of these systems, crossed by no trade route that couldn't be easily relocated. By abandoning it, we lose nothing. The Ishtals win nothing. However, our supply lines get 75 light-years shorter, and there's 75 longer. This, combined with the shorter border, will make defending our core territory possible, despite being outnumbered. Very good analysis, Field Marshal, but that's not all we'll do. Just because we will not defend this territory does not mean we will not fight there. What do you mean? The Ishtal military is typical of these kind of monarchies. The position is not obtained by your merit, but by your titles and glory in battle. We need to give them the impression that we are actually defending, and they're just steamrolling us. But here's the catch. We need to make their most incompetent general, the inexperienced children of the nobility, look as glorious as possible. On the other hand, she pressed a button and portraits of Ishtal generals appeared on the screen. We need to absolutely humiliate these guys in the eyes of the Emperor, as they are by far their best military leaders. She zoomed one of the portraits. This is General Allred with eyes, perhaps the greatest military genius the Empire has seen in several centuries. Despite being born a commoner, he managed to climb the hierarchy by his sheer bravery and competence. We have big plans about him in our latter strategy. But for now, all you need to know is that you must make his campaign look like a disaster. 5 years later, General Allred with eyes was enraged. This campaign had been a disaster, and he knew exactly why. He could read the Voltari strategy like an open book. But who could believe him when he performed worse than some descendant of whatever noble house wanted to shine in a conquest? Well, his men, of course, and the other generals smart enough to recognize the tactics employed. But they too had fallen out of favor. Now, the Empire's best soldiers and commanders were guarding a border. In the eventuality the situation escalates, while a bunch of inexperienced pricks were leading costly and useless attacks one after the other, draining the Empire's resources even further. And now, a single passenger Voltari ship had entered the system. What could that mean? It was of course going to get intercepted, but what was the objective of this maneuver? A defection was unlikely, and the Voltari weren't the kind of people to act without an objective, even when the humans weren't there to give them advice. The humans, such a pain for the Empire, even before the war started. Trading with them was beneficial to almost any nation, and they used that as a weapon. They had been arming the enemies of the Ishtals for almost 2 decades, and the worst part was that it was actually profitable for them. but the general was sure annoying the Empire was a nice bonus. The only way still open for expansion was the territory of the swarm. The human, of course, wanted them gone as fast as possible, so they had ensured they would be the juiciest military target in the sector. General, we have taken the Voltari prisoner. He claims to be a member of the government, here to negotiate. His soldier just called him General instead of Your Excellency or Your Glory, in a blatant violation of etiquette. But Allred preferred it this way. It reminded everyone that what mattered was not the titles he held, nor the land he owned, but his skills. If only those damned parasites at the court realized it, but they would soon wake up. An ominous grin formed on the general's face. Negotiate. That meant the Voltari knew what was brewing. Well, an ally would come in handy when the time was right. Make sure he has no hidden weapons, and then bring him to my office. I'm sure we'll have a lot to negotiate about. A moment later, the Voltari Minister of Foreign Affairs and General Allred of With Eyes were seating in the small, but comfortable room the general had made into his office. When he was granted command of this fleet, the first thing he did was turning his lavish apartments in the flagship into ammunition storage and a second infirmary. This had, of course, angered the court, but he didn't care. They needed him, and he knew it. It would soon be clear, however, that he didn't need them. So, you're here to negotiate. Why not contact the Emperor, then? Well, we thought it would be a waste of time to deal with someone who will lose the throne so soon. We'd much rather like a deal with his successor. You dare to suggest I would rebel against my Emperor? Said the general, sarcastically. Even if it wasn't the case, the army and the people are tired of the terrible leadership lately. You're a popular hero. When they inevitably revolt, they'll want you on the throne. The fact that you're kept far away from the battlefield only fuels the rumors that the Emperor fears you. As if that wasn't the result of your tactics. We simply gave the Emperor a convenient excuse for what he already wanted to do. Poor kid. He lives in the shadow of his father, didn't want to live in the shadow of his general, and soon he will not live at all. He simply isn't built for the job. If it was only me, I'd let him live in exile, but the noble houses will never recognize my legitimacy if the previous dynasty survives. But enough talking, let's get to business. What is your offer? We help you in the civil war, and give you a couple of basically empty systems to make your victory more credible. In exchange, you give up any revendication on our territory. We'll also be open to trade negotiation, to provide you with food. Because that's the real reason for the invasion, isn't it? Food is getting more expensive, as the great houses voluntarily decrease production to pressure the Emperor into accepting their demands. I see our inner politics have no secret for you. Very well, I accept the deal, as it will be beneficial to both parties. Hopefully, we'll meet soon for more official negotiation. 14 months later. His Imperial Majesty, Allred Roman III, first Emperor of the With Eyes dynasty, had spent the first 2 months of his reign meeting foreign diplomats and making all kinds of deals and agreements. He's selling us to foreign powers, said the high nobility. Well, they could slander him all they wanted. That would only give him more excuses to reduce their power even further. He had the total support of the populace, army, and low nobility, and considering how the improved trade and various reforms improved their situation, he would keep it for a long time. Today, he would meet the human representative, maybe the most important meeting since the Voltari, right after the coronation. He hoped he would manage a deal for weapons. Then again, it was for them the best way to ensure that he would move forward with his stated program of conquest of the swarm, so they would probably accept. At this thought, he began to smile. In the end, he did exactly what the humans wanted of him, not because he was manipulated or corrupt, but simply because they had ensured it would be the best option for him and the Empire. He then realized that the old saying, "Humans win every war," didn't only apply to the wars they fought in.